Hi, welcome back to my projects. Well, I've had a cardboard project for the longest time to build like a shed with these big, large panels for outdoors. And I've also been gathering up quite a number of these aluminum tins. And I've been trying to wrap my head around what I can actually use these tins with and actually combine the ability that I've been using for making these large panels. So I made a hexagon panel. I'm trying to resemble the James Webb T-Spout satellite for a collector array style with this kind of a grid to focus the light, to heat something, to make hot water, steam, anything of that sort for a Stirling engine. That's part of the puzzle that I haven't figured out yet, how to like DIY on my own. I'm not even sure where even go buy a Stirling engine in the first place, but DIY one that's big enough that can produce a sufficient amount of power off one of these things. So instead of making PV array like traditional, you'll have a large array of these panels focusing onto a small point. And I've seen somebody do a reproduction of it with largely 3D printed parts. And when I saw this monstrosity out in his backyard or whatever, it it did produce a lot of power, which is great, but it was horrible in the wind. So how practical would it be left out, 90% of the time without the fact of bad weather or something like that, or it's like really, really windy or something like that. So I want to come up with these panels as a starting point, and then I got to make these tiles that go on top of it. One of the challenges that I can tell already is going to be a problem is focusing this surface on a point that's maybe about 3 feet away from itself, something like that. Maybe not quite that far, but kind of far. Whatever the ratio is for the James Webb satellite, I'm just going to try to keep those proportions kind of close, because if it works, somebody spent a lot of the money to do all the work, so why not copy something that's already out there like that? I'm just merely make it into a affordable reproduction. If I can use waterproof cardboard that can be outside, mold it in these shapes, you know. Another thing that I'm going to try to do is the guy that I saw online did it. It was basically a perfectly flat mirror that he had, focusing on basically, he had 18 of these tiles, focusing on basically one of these tiles. But I want to see if I can, step it up, make it even more so. So if you can make this, instead of being a completely flat surface, make it, I don't know, was it concave, like a slightly parabolic, like this. So the focus point, instead of being flat, would be basically a small point. And so that way, this surface area would be concentrated into a size like yay size times 18. That's going to be one really hot spot right there that you can utilize for something, harnessing heat, basically. That's the goal anyway. So this is what I'm working on now. And I can figure, like, if I get the design down right, I can have a grid of these things out in the backyard, all tracking the sun. And that's the other thing too, is these things can get rather large, and I would imagine once they get upwards in size of, like, 5 feet, 10 feet across, 15 feet across, like really, really, really wide, they start to become they're catching more light, which is great, but they're also catching a lot of the wind, which is not so good because it doesn't really do anything with the wind and can actually harm it in a really high wind situation. So by having more of them that are smaller and closer to the ground, that could be an advantage. So you'll get the same kind of surface area if you just multiply each base station, and each base station would be something like this, and they'll just kind of track the sun somehow, and you have multiple of them do the same thing, and then they can all produce power. Another idea I have is try to DIY a spin battery. I'm wondering if there's any way you can get, ways of making really low friction. I mean, it won't be zero, it won't be a maglev, but if you can get it relatively low for relatively cheap and everything. You know, whatever you can put in there, you get out. Might not be exactly what a battery would do, but a battery would degrade over time. Weight is still weight, you know, today, tomorrow, and whenever. The weight's still the weight, you know. So you just have to engineer a nice bearing device. So that could be kind of neat. So you can have the sun collecting the energy, using what it can't use because of whatever. They can dump it into these spin batteries. They can spin up and they can store the energy. And then at night, when you're not using the sun, you know, you can pull some energy back. Plus, I'm also thinking about ways of making vertical axis wind turbines too of some sort. You know, why not? I mean, if the material is basically free and you can make a wind generator, you know, why not? So you can have solar, wind, all that stuff. And the cool thing about back to the my reproduction of the James Webb um, collector dish, whatever, is if for whatever reason one of these mirrors gets damaged, you can pop it out easily and replace it with a new one because the material is just cardboard and these tins. And even though these tins are pretty reflective in and of itself, you can actually get it to a mirror-like finish. You know, pretty close to a mirror-like finish for having just a base station of or a base of just aluminum. Also, the size that I picked for this tile is specific for this tin, so it maximizes this surface area here will be continuous, so I don't have to worry about having like a seam anywhere where I'm joining multiple of these tins. So like if you try to do the same thing with aluminum with soda cans, you might be limited by how much space you have. But regardless, I got right now I'm sitting on about 125 pounds, maybe 130 pounds of these tins, where you only need 18 of these things. It's about maybe half a pound of these things to make an 18 segment solar collector. So that's, I know the original project was the shed, and that's still going to happen, but you know, this is probably more funner. So, but I know I got a lot of projects. I'm also pretty much finished up with the table saw, the bandsaw rather. There's a couple like nice things I might want to add to it. Like there's a way that you tension in the belt of the bandsaw before you use it, and if you're left for a period of time, you want to untension it. And if you try to run it when it's untensioned, it would just bind up, and then you have to go take the thing all apart again just to put your belt back on again. If it's not, you know, if it's still usable. So I want to put a sensor in there. So basically, so when it's in its okay state, it'll let you turn it on. But if you have it in its untensioned state, it'll just won't let the user, this idiot, you know, turn it on and wreck itself. So, and there's a few other things, but it's really getting like a sensor. So like if I stand in front of it, it will be on. If I walk away from it, it'll turn off. Another one I have an idea for is like the vacuum cleaner. Draws a lot of power. Go figure. It's a vacuum cleaner. So I was thinking about a sensor. So once you put it in there, it'll detect there's a cardboard in there. It'll start to vacuum up. You can cut your piece. If you're doing multiple pieces, it will stay on. But then once the last piece comes out, after a second, it'll just turn off. You know, save on power. So that could be a good idea. You know, depending on how many of these things I'm like constantly using, but a lot of this stuff right now is like just in prototype stages. So one thing at a time, right? So, but you know, yeah, other ideas for like these tins were like for the garage, or sorry, the attached shed. This might be a good material for a siding, like a shingle type thing out of aluminum. That's a common material. Of course, you're going to have to figure out a way to join these things parallel and then lengthwise like this on a panel. But I think that could be a, you know, a novel use case for this thing. And because it's metal, reflects a lot of that. I think it's infrared light or infrared energy by being just aluminum. So to keep the the glues and everything behind the panel a little bit cooler, maybe. Also, I'm trying to come up with ways of joining the panels. I actually saw like it's coming eventually. It's a like a zip tie gun, but it's like a metal zip tie gun. So I'm figuring that might be good, but trying to even go even cheaper than that. I want to like wrap it with a string around the spines on the edges with a like a ratcheting device. I have just a ratchet strap. I think that I might be able to modify that into something. So yeah, ramblings of a madman. So all right, that's it for now. Have a good one.